Hello and welcome. In the last section we talked about advanced update concepts such as concurrency handling and transactional support. In this section we will see how migrations will help us update database schema as part of software updates. We will start by discussing migrations that are automatically scaffolded by Entity Framework. Then we will take a quick dive into Migrations API to see what common actions could be accomplished with migrations. Then we will see how to create migrations by coding by hand. And finally, we will take a look to see how we can handle existing data, keeping it from being destructed by migrations. Let's start with the first video, creating automatic migrations. We will start by setting up project for migrations. We will scaffold our initial migration. And finally, we will see how we can update or create a new database schema via migrations. Let's get started. We are back in Visual Studio, and first thing we need to do is modify our project. We have to do that because the tooling installations aren't currently supported by NuGet user interface inside Visual Studio. So all we need to do is edit the project and add one of these two lines. This is actually exact same tooling, Entity Framework tooling package. We could install either version for Package Manager console that's available in Visual Studio or .NET executable available from command line. We will use .NET executable in this video. Now that the project has been modified, we need to run .NET restore. So let's switch back to command line. Now that we are on command line, we need to type .NET restore to restore all NuGet packages for this context project, not for the solution, but for the project. This only takes a second. Now we're ready to create our first migration. Before we do that, let's talk for a second what migrations are. As we develop our applications, our code, the consequently database schema, will change. Thus, we might distribute those changes and deliver both software and schema changes as part of the overall software package. Entity Framework Core allows us to do both at the same time via this feature that we just call migrations. They're part of generated Entity Framework code and could be called to apply schema changes to the next version of the software while preserving the data. Let's start with the first migration. As part of the commands that are installed with the package we just saw are EF commands. So if we just type .NET EF, we will see a help page for the available commands. So there are three available. There are database commands, DB context commands, and migrations. We are interested in migrations. If we just type .NET EF migrations, then we will see a help page for specifically migrations command. In this case, we can add, list migrations, remove one, or generate a script. Let's scaffold our initial migration. To do that, we need to type .NET, which is our executable name. We're going to call EF command. We're going to use migrations subcommand. We're going to need to add one. We're going to call it initial. And there is one more thing we have to do, which is specify DB context we want to use. The reason we have to do that is because this specific project contains two types that inherit from DB context. If you only have one, you don't need to specify. Let's hit enter. This will build and scaffold the initial migration, which will take a few seconds. As you can see, the process finished. It actually looks and analyzes our model, and it noted that our property is active on a person is configured with database generated default, even though it's not nullable property. So we could fix that warning if we would like. Now let's switch back to Visual Studio. It automatically picked up the changes to the file system, and now we see that there is a migrations folder, which is a default folder, and we have two artifacts in it. We have a snapshot that was generated that contains all of our tables and columns. It also generated the initial C# code that inherits from migration class, which is the key part, and it has two methods in it, up and down. The reason it has two methods is because Migrations API allows us to revert the changes. So if we take a look at to see what it does, it creates a schema if it does not exist. Then it creates a whole bunch of tables, After that, it creates some indices on those tables. So it's a typical SQL code. However, it's represented by C# code attached to a base class called migration. Now we can apply migrations. Let's switch back to command line. And now we need to use database command. So if we forgot, we can type .NET EF database, and we will get help information for database command. In this case, all we want to do is update it, called update command. We can actually up arrow to get back to where we were, because we need most of the settings. And we can type .NET EF database update and specify the context again. And now we can run the migration. This will actually, in just a second, generate an error because our database already contains all of those objects that got scaffolded. So we will learn a little bit more how to handle existing databases in a subsequent video. For now, we will simply change what database we're gonna run against. Here's the error that came up that says there is already an object named companies in a database. So let's switch back to Visual Studio and change our connection string. And we're back in Visual Studio, and we're going to find our app settings JSON file. We're going to change it to just simply say context database 2. Now let's switch back to command line and run the same command again. As you can see, this time our database update succeeded. As a result, we now have an identical copy of our initial database, just called database 2.